Hello, and my name is Lewis,
And I'm Susanna.
and this is Switched Media.
So this week we were planning on filming in our usual location. However, unfortunately, I have become sick, and with the current global situation, we were unable to go into the studio to film. So this week's will be happening over Zoom. We'd love to introduce my very best friend, Sarah Wilson, who is an emerging playwright here in Brisbane, who has agreed to come on and speak with us this week. We are talking all things theatre, writing, being a woman in that industry, and also being September, it is Pride Month, and we'll be touching on some really interesting topics regarding some LGBTQ plus representation, not only in theatre, but in arts and entertainment in general. So welcome, Sarah. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hey, thank you for having me, team. So as Susie said, I'm an emerging Brisbane-based playwright. I have been making trouble since 2016. So I was in Queensland Theatre's Young Writers Group in 2016. I was in their playwrights program 18 to 26 in 2017. 2018, I was in Playlab's incubator program where I developed a work called the Kmart Chronicles. And then currently I am at Playlab on their Rising Commission, so the Emerging Female Playwrights Commission, which I believe we have a production next year, COVID permitting, I believe is the plan.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about some of the works that you've been, some of the stuff you've been working on, like what your interests are in terms of what you write, etc.
Yeah, for sure. So I am a playwright, so I mostly write for theatre live performance. As is kind of the common emerging playwright sort of thing, I tend to write 2 to 3 handers. So plays that require two to three actors, which is not to say there's 2 to 3 characters. It's theatre, baby. So probably my main works that I would be known for, part of the kind of emerging playwright thing is I don't have anything that's been published. I have a lot of plays that have had developments and workshops, but nothing that's had like a staged production yet. Growth mindset. I'm 22, growth mindset. So the piece that I developed at Queensland Theatre when I was in the playwrights program was called Recreational Mathematics. So that was a play about, I write a lot of spec fic, so speculative, and a lot of bottle episodes. That was a play about this girl who was like genetically engineered to be really, really good at maths and was basically living in this underground bunker. It was very kind of, I write a lot of like absurdist or absurdist inspired, so it was very like No Exit, if either of you all have read No Exit. And then I, at Incubator, developed the Kmart Chronicles, as I said, which was a play about trauma, and basically 2 girls who are on this 3-year loop unbeknownst to one of them, and the loop kind of ends when they have this interaction in the Kmart, and that was based on I had a mental breakdown in a Kmart. It was like, it's time. And that one is probably more specifically a queer work. It more explicitly, I will say, as in you find out the 2 girls are in love. Spoilers.
I do have a question, Sarah.
Yes.
What's the process like of writing like a script? How do you dedicate your time, and like how long does a script take, for example?
The process, as far as I've been through it, is it's a lot more collaborative is the wrong word, because I think all arts tends to be quite collaborative, especially when you have a performance art added in. But it tends to be like there's a lot of workshopping, and there's a lot of like you sit down and write the script, but it's very much understood that like that's your first draft, and then you'll have normally like multiple versions of the play will exist, because it's really, really common for you have your script that is like the script at the time we begin rehearsals, and that is normally what's sent to the publisher, because you want to have the books like done, the play scripts done by the time the show's on, so you can just be selling them. But often the script will continue to evolve over the course of the rehearsal period. So you'll end up with these really interesting discrepancies where the performance text is different from the published text, or the performance text, sorry, is the actual performance, but like the script used to create the performance text, is different.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I think that's the main thing, is like I haven't interacted with that in my very limited interactions with the film industry. Is there isn't that sense of workshopping, like like I had a workshop for recreational mathematics way back in 2017, and I had like it was a three-hander, but I had my full cast. Queensland Theatre brought in like a director, like an actual director to direct, and it was just a sit-down rehearsed reading.
Okay, right, yeah. No.
So like when you like when in the scripts that you've written, like the plays you've written and things, how do you find like you would get your inspiration? Like, is it just you get like an idea that comes to you? Is it like a bit of a scene, some dialogue, a general idea kind of thing? Where do you find you often start off from?
I generally tend to start from, I guess it's kind of like a scene, a moment. I tend to do very like moody, like things that are less like I don't want to say they're not plot driven, because they very much do have a plot, but they're very much like focused on the relationships between the characters. So it'll normally be this like moment, or like, so as I was saying with Kmart Chronicles, literally what happened to me is I was having a breakdown in a Kmart, and then like a teacher from like Susie and I went to high school together. So the music teacher basically came around the corner with her kid, looked at me and like bailed. I basically wrote it based on like why would that happen, for the reason, reasons other than why it did happen.
You write a lot from like your own personal experiences as a starter for then a fictional work, as a the writing what you know kind of.
Yeah, there is definitely a sense of writing what you know, or writing from a place of, I think writing for me started as being this really important outlet for explaining to people things that were happening in my internal life that I couldn't just be like, so here's that, you know what I mean? I think it's very difficult to entirely divorce yourself from your own context, right? Like for me to write a play and for it not to be somehow linked to my experiences being a woman, a cis woman, for me to be able to write and for it not to be in some way affected by the fact that I'm, queer, like that's, I don't, like, you don't have to write about being Australian woman, queer, white, whatever, for it to still affect the way that you write.
As someone who, is working in industry as a woman, as a queer woman and stuff, how do you find that affects the way that you like consume entertainment, however you consume, like, in terms of movies, books, TV, the theatre itself? Like, how does that affect the way that you kind of consume that entertainment?
I think for me, definitely with my medium more generally, there was a level of, when you're a kid, everything was quite, especially I think it's getting better for kids. Like you've got a lot of, well, not a lot, you're starting to see more and more kids shows that have a level of queer representation. That was just, like, that was not present in the early 2000s, right? Like that just wasn't how it was. It wasn't like that certainly before the early 2000s. So there was certainly a point where when I could control the media I was consuming, when I could buy movies, when I could buy books, because I had, you know, disposable income, there was definitely like a strong shift for me to be like, I never want to see another heterosexual romance ever again. And I've gently moved the pendulum back to now I will consume probably a healthy heterosexual romance now and again. But yeah, there was definitely this swing back the other way. I think definitely, though, one of the discussions I've had around my writing and industry is kind of having to explain to, you know, heterosexual dramaturgs or other writers or directors that I'm working with, normally not directors, normally dramaturg. Don't dunk on dramaturgs, they're delightful. But having to explain, I'm like, well, the thing that is empowering to you as a straight person is not actually, or is like subversive to you as a straight person, is actually not subversive or empowering to me as a queer person. Like the really basic thing is like the subversive thing often for a heterosexual thing is, you know, this sort of love at first sight to a happily ever after, just like subvert that, right? To make it like kind of like, actually love at first sight is gross and you can't, you know, necessarily trust your genitalia to dictate, like, you know, like just because you have a warm fuzzy feeling doesn't mean it's the best thing, which is absolutely, I don't disagree with as an idea, and it is definitely quite, you know, like that's Frozen, right? Like that's the plot of Frozen. And so I certainly think that's a really valid trope, especially when we're talking about heterosexual media, but I think that that has a problematic implication when you're looking at queer media, where we don't have hundreds and hundreds of years of love at first sight stories, right? Like, so to skip straight to the subversion is sort of, it's not a subversion because there's nothing to subvert, and it comes dangerously close to, you know, I'm sure the kids know about Bury Your Gays. Should I explain Bury Your Gays?
Ooh, yes, that's always a great one to talk about.
That's a great one. Basically, the idea was, from a morality standpoint in novels, and then there was like a formalized legal thing, at least in the US, in terms of their rating systems and censorship, that if you had gay people, you had to show that that had a bad outcome, right? Like that's why if we look at Carmilla, which is a very formative, at least for me, queer vampire work, which is predates Dracula, by the way, not to flex on Bram Stoker, and it had also a very popular internet web series adaptation, which is how I came across it. But that is ostensibly just about like this vampire seducing a young waifish girl in the appropriate era for the time. And then it takes this really hard turn at like right at the end where basically they go and they kill Carmilla.
Yeah.
And like it turns out she was this monster the whole time, and like it's this like awful and brutal sort of thing because, you know, it's lesbianism, so like it can't have been like, it's this awful unnatural thing and you had to kill it. And yeah, the tonal shift is very weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that led to this trope, this censorship of like, it was really easy to show that it had a bad end by kind of Romeo and Julieting it, right? By like just killing them at the end. So we end up with this habit in culture of the gays don't live, right? Yeah. So that's kind of what Bury Your Gays comes from, is in a contemporary context, we still have these echoes of like,
yeah, it's very common in a lot of media. For example, like the 100, which was a very popular show that finally had the main character got into a relationship with another woman. And everyone was going, yes, yes, finally. They were together for about half an episode, and then they kill off and it's very common. So when I was at the Edinburgh Television Festival a couple of years ago, sorry, not a couple of years ago, last year.
It feels like a couple of years ago.
It does. That's what COVID does to you. Some of the main themes, it was talking a lot about representation across the board. So it talked about, female representation, disability representation, but there was quite a few workshops and discussion panels about queer representation. And one of the ones which was really interesting was one about, it was 20 years on from Queer as Folk. Which was a revolutionary show over in the UK back in the early 90s, came out late 90s, and actually was about that queer people living in a particular section of Britain. And it was problematic for other reasons due to ages and stuff and the timing, but basically a lot of the people on the panel were talking about how for them this show was their escape. They literally sat in their basements with it on right next to the TV, turning the volume up and down or changing the channel when they thought someone was coming.
But
it was their outlet and it was their space. So like Courtney Act was there, and she was on this panel. And she was talking about how like that was such a moment for her as a young person, looking and getting to see a representation of herself that she'd never gotten to see before. There, and it was this moment of there's other people like me, and we can be shown. And that basically the panel was talking about the way that representation in media actually affects representation and diversity and acceptance in real life. It's not just something that you see on your TV screen that's like, yay, great, we can see them. But if you actually look at the levels of acceptance, how long it took for marriage equality to come around in Australia compared to the UK, we were behind the US. Like, that is not something to be proud of.
That's not good. It's not good, man.
To be proud of. But the fact that, a lot of the reasons why it's taken so much longer in Australia for these things to become accepted and everything is actually got a lot to do with the fact that you don't see that representation on Australian screen, and people don't have that. And when they do actually finally get a chance to see themselves, however that is, gay, lesbian, bi, trans, whatever it is, that character is so often and so quickly killed off. And so it's this constant repeated narrative of you're valid and now you're dead. You're valid and now you're dead. And that not getting to see those storylines carry on the way that heteronormative storylines don't have that. And heteronormative storylines, killing someone is a major and deliberate plot device, which isn't the case with barrier gays.
And this sense of motivation to it. I think there's also, what am I trying to say? I think it's because queer stuff has been present for all of history, but was very, very much an underground and secretive subculture for their own safety. Like, I think a lot of people forget that like it was illegal to be gay into the 70s in Australia. And Queensland in particular was the second to last state to decriminalize sodomy. And so like that's really fresh. Like, both of my parents were born in an era where it was a crime to be gay, to have gay sex, but to be gay ostensibly. And so like that's really fresh in terms of like, honestly, I think in a lot of ways we've had a leaps and bounds of in media, especially due to things like Queer as Folk or the original Queer Eye or the L Word. And even though they don't necessarily hold up to the language and the kind of way that we talk about queer issues now, 100%, like they did so much legwork in just
building the foundation, right? And that exactly. I was gonna ask, like how do you see it going forward, because that's probably the most important step. We've spoken about. It's actually super informative to me. I've never actually noticed or read or known about the the killing of someone in media who is, or the disappearance, or their character is ripped off. Like, what is
the obsession with the tragedy? I think as well. Like I think are now in an era where it's a lot about like sad coming out stories, getting rejected by your parents, which again is a really important outlet and is the experience of a lot of queer people. Like queer people are so overrepresented. Queer youth, sorry, are so overrepresented in homeless youth. Trans youth even more so. They're so much more in danger of basically literally being kicked out.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do. I think that's kind of moving into being the new bury your gays is like kick your gays out of home.
We're seeing a lot more media being developed, which doesn't have that representation. Like, and I think, are you expecting to see this media going forward being more produced like this? And
I think the answer is definitely, I really hope so.
Yeah.
Obviously we have, I think there's, culturally we do tend to fall into this myth of like, we're on a roller coaster that only goes up, right? In terms of representation of like, well, now we have people of color on screen and now we have queer people on screen and that's not going to go away. But I am resistant to that sort of complacency because you can backslide, and there has been backsliding in eras past, and especially so much of our media comes from the US, and the US they're having a rough time, buddy. Yeah. So I certainly think that on a large scale, I would imagine we're going towards it. I definitely think that we can go towards it faster or slower, though, because obviously I'm sitting here as a white lesbian, but the intersectionality is really important because these things tend to be compounded like more than the sum of their parts in terms of like it's so much more dangerous to be a trans woman of color versus a white woman of color. Woman of color, white trans woman. What?
Yeah.
I can't. It's fine.
And I guess that one of the important things is to see more of this, more representation in media means not just having the representation on screen, but there needs to be so much more representation behind it, in writers' rooms, through directors and producers and the people like that actually are making the content, because how can you make accurately representing content if you don't have those people involved in the process of whatever kind of representation we're talking about? You need to have those people involved in the creation process, not just as actors, not just in character work, but across the whole board. Otherwise it's kind of almost a token throwaway if you're saying, oh hey, look here, got a nice little gay character, we're just going to slide in the end of Beauty and the Beast. That doesn't actually have any genuine impact long term, especially.
And I mean, I can throw out kind of a couple of fun theatre anecdotes if you'd like. The thing I'd definitely say up the top though is, again, TED Talks, I don't know the speakers, I'm so sorry, but there was a particular TED Talk I saw where they're like, the issue with stereotyping is not that the story is incorrect, it's that it's one story and that's the only story getting told. Like there are like hyper femme gay men who are like that trademark. Like there's stone butch gay women who can fix cars, but like that's the problem, is when that one story is getting regurgitated all the time. And kind of the joke is like it's not that straight people can't tell jokes about gay people, it's that they only have two jokes and they're not funny anymore. Like yeah, definitely in terms of like having that presence in the behind the scenes, 100% agree with. Theatre, I like to think we're a little bit better in terms of cultural consulting. We do have kind of one of the hot issues at the moment is making sure that you're not hiring queer actors or actors of color and expecting them to do cultural consulting for free because they're an actor in the workshop. And kind of this move towards being like, no, you need to actually, if you want a cultural consultant in the workshop, hire them as a cultural consultant only. Don't make them do more work than they're.
Pay them as both and pay them for both.
Yeah, and make sure they have an awareness that you're like, I would like you to act in this workshop and be a cultural consultant, and we are paying you for both. kind of that honesty of like why you would like them in the room.
You know, more representation in media in front and behind the camera, in front and behind the scenes of theatre, of, you know, novels, of all those kinds of things is just going to help. It's going to help people to just continue to learn and grow and create that space for discourse. And that space for, you know, for people to see themselves, feel that representation, and also grow conversations that will hopefully continue to lead to more change. I'll just say thanks, Sarah, for coming on and letting us hear some perspectives from theatre, from a woman working in theatre, a queer woman working in theatre. Hopefully, being Pride Month, this will be the first of many conversations that will be happening around the world, particularly around Brisbane and around Australia, about these issues, and hopefully getting some more conversations and more representation starting to really become a key part of discussions around entertainment across all the genres within that. We'll hopefully be having Sarah back in a week or so to talk about some other issues that she's started to raise here around the idea of labour and free labour and fan labour within the industry, both in theatre and across all kinds of aspects. That's certainly a very big issue that we'll be looking forward to having a bit more discourse around. Let us know in the comments if this is an experience that you've had, any experiences you've had of misrepresentation. If you're within the queer community, we'd love to hear your stories, areas where you think the industry could improve, or any recommendations for people to watch if they wanted to learn more about this issue, or if there's particular programs that you find have great representation. Let us know. Let everyone else in the comments know so that people can start checking out some more resources to learn more and become more educated on this issue. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Hello, my name is Lewis, and that is Susanna. Oh, never mind. We'll try again.
Excuse me.
Trying to wrap up and not working out how to do that.
Do I get to call you Susie on the show? Is that how are the vibes for that?
Gonna start that again because I stopped mid-sentence. Okay, that was